Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm fine.
Good. Listen, our global media juggernaut rolls on. A few days ago, a couple guys from a Japanese newspaper came here to our East Coast studio and interviewed me because they're doing a piece on some aspect of technology that's going to involve Bloggingheads TV. The guy, the Japanese guy, there was an American guy and a Japanese guy, seemed a little disappointed in how unlike a TV studio this looks, and how much it looks like the disheveled office of a guy trying to write a book. I tried to argue that was kind of the whole point, but I'm not sure.
Well, it's the TV station of the future.
Yeah, that's the way I should have put it, probably. I'm not sure I'd won him over by the end, but I mean, of course, the bad news, Mickey, in this is, ever since we started this, you and I both had trouble even leaving our houses without being just besieged by throngs of autograph seekers and well-wishers.
And you were going to take refuge in Japan.
Well, both of us, I think. Hadn't you been getting your R&R in Japan just to get away from it all? I mean, that's what I thought. And once this story comes out, it's, Geisha Girl City for you.
Why aren't they going to steal our technology and produce it cheaper and better?
But, the guy was quite inquisitive about the technology.
You didn't, show him the family jewels, did you?
No, our secret is safe with me, Mickey.
Okay, good. It's certainly safe for me. I don't know what the hell's going on here, but... well, that's great. Today Japan, tomorrow the world.
Yeah, well, we should stop in China, but then the world.
And you're big in Japan, I know.
Oh.
Your book has been translated in Japan, and I'm sure you've checked the translation to make sure you don't say anything that you don't actually say.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So,
cool.
In the news...
Yeah.
Ripped from the day's news, these Canadian terrorist suspects.
Yeah, I think I can predict what you're going to say about that.
I think I can predict what you're going to say. I think we each have a hobby horse point that we think is vindicated by these arrests.
Well, I don't know what my hobby horse point is, so I'll say what your hobby horse point is.
Okay.
You're going to say that the fact that these people had no formal connection with Al-Qaeda, just shows how misguided the Bush war on terrorism is. Because that's even more dangerous if they are spontaneously growing up in opposition to the United States and enraged by our policies in Iraq and Iran, and they're about to blow things up without any central control. That shows that the important thing is lowering the level of hatred of the United States in the world and not toppling states like Iraq.
I wouldn't have put it quite like that. I would have been a little more self-aggrandizing. I would have pointed out that shortly after 9/11, I began saying we shouldn't think of the object of the game as being to kill or capture everyone in Al-Qaeda per se, because the problem is their ideology is contagious, and so it matters how we go about killing and capturing them. To the extent that we do it in a way that increases, that helps their ideology spread, we're in trouble. This is a case of that. I mean, these guys are described as inspired by Al-Qaeda, but not affiliated with it. Well, so you're basically right about what I would say.
It's interesting. There's a post on Oxblog that suggests that there is something bigger in the works. I mean, the evidence is pretty flimsy, but there's similar raids in London, and there might be the sense that some big global thing was planned soon. And that every country, all the Western countries' intelligence agencies sort of decided to roll up everybody in order to prevent this from happening. So it might be more coordinated than it seems at the moment.
Well, these guys supposedly had some connection with a couple of guys who'd been arrested here in America, in Georgia. There's a limit to what you can do with fertilizer bombs. These were Tim McVeigh. This is Tim McVeigh type technology, but especially if it's orchestrated internationally, it can make quite an impact. I mean, you can kill a few hundred people in Canada even.
The limit is that you can only kill a few hundred people with them, and there's no...
Well, it depends on how you place them. I mean, I think the last report I saw said they had 1.5 times as much fertilizer as Tim McVeigh. Now, you could probably you could have planted his bomb maybe to get more bang per buck, but he actually seemed to do a pretty efficient job of it. I don't know how big a building you could take down. I don't know, but we're not talking weapons of mass destruction levels of casualties.
But the whole question of did they ever take possession of these? Did they actually order 3 tons, or was that suggested by some undercover agent? hey, I have 3 tons. You want it?
Right.
It is not clear, and the flimsiness of the charges, or the lack of, not the flimsiness, but the lack of detail, dovetails with the Oxblog theory that they were just using any pretext to roll up everybody in sight because they knew something was going on. So they had this guy phone in this offer of 3 tons, and when they took it, boom, they arrested everybody.
Could be.
So I don't know that we should make too much of the 3 tons.
Now back just briefly to my hobby horse, Mickey.
You haven't gotten to my hobby horse.
I know.
I don't even know what my hobby horse is. So
we're taking first things first. I'll unveil your hobby horse shortly.
Okay.
The one of my lines is, so this means that you have to be careful in whether your war on terrorism is antagonizing Muslims who already live in your country. And I typically bring out the example of things like ethnic profiling, which I think you favor. Now, in Canada, in the Canada case here, there was this guy in his 40s who was apparently the chief kind of recruiter and ringleader, so far as we can tell. He was a prominent guy at this mosque, and he was known for taking, like, young guys, and doing things with them and spending a lot of time with them. He seems to be a terrorist recruiter. Surely you would agree that if you have an ethnic profiling system at borders, in airports, and so on, that may make his job of recruitment a little easier because there's going to be more stuff about the surrounding culture that these young males resent.
Sure, that's always true.
Okay.
It'll make it a little easier, and you have to weigh that against the inefficiency of not doing profiling.
Okay, but you're still pro-profiling.
I think on airplanes, yes. And I think
Okay.
The interesting thing to me in Canada was that there's sort of two representatives of Muslims in Canada that the papers have interviewed, and one has done the standard thing familiar to Americans and said, this shows that there's overreaching and profiling is more victimization of the Muslim community. But the other guy who's often cited has taken this incredibly responsible line that we don't see too often in the American press of, these were bad people, we have to rid our community of them, and the police are doing a good thing, and didn't do any of this victimization business. He said,
the police are doing a good thing in what? In arresting them?
In removing this cancer from our community.
Well, sure, that's fine. I'm not objecting to arresting suspected terrorists.
No, I wasn't saying this was an argument against you. I was just saying it was a contrast with the United States, where you do not see many Muslim leaders saying the thing that the Canadian guy said.
Okay. Not
Mr.
sure
Fonte.
about that, but as always, I defer to your expertise.
Okay, but what's
Your
my
hobby
point?
horse is, I thought you were going to look into how they found these guys and discover that a lot of it involved, data mining and phone taps and blah, 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 and say, see, it works. Were you not
I did have that written down, but I'd forgotten it, yes. They probably used some techniques that American civil libertarians would object to, including reading encrypted email.
Yeah.
But we didn't. Maybe they got a warrant for it, so you can't push that
So
too
you're
far.
just talking through your hat here.
Unless we know, it's an obvious hobby horse to ride, but we don't know enough details. Maybe they, dotted all the I's and followed whatever the Canadian equivalent of getting a warrant is.
Could be.
So that's why I didn't bring it up, Bob, because I'm a responsible blogginghead.
So your hobby horse is still in the corral.
Correct.
So we move on to what, Iraq?
I think so, yes.
This another atrocity scandal. Second, I guess the biggest one since Abu Ghraib, right?
Yes. Although, the prospect of it being all Haditha all the time on NPR and the inevitable attempts, which have already started in the New York Times, to sort of push it further up the chain of command, when it really doesn't seem like this is something that, unlike Abu Ghraib, could be pushed too far up the chain of command. Sort of soldiers are going to go berserk occasionally when one of their buddies gets killed. Especially, in the case where you probably not crazily suspect that everybody, all the civilians around you, sympathize with the people who killed your buddy.
But isn't the question whether the cover-up went up the chain of command?
I guess so, but it seems to me the cover-up doesn't have to go very far up the chain of command because the people, they lied about it in the report when they got back to base. So, how that doesn't implicate Donald Rumsfeld. That's sort of what routinely happens with these things. The other point I'd want to make is, people say, well, this is like My Lai in Vietnam. Well, maybe it is, but I think people have a different perspective on Vietnam, which is a lot of people, at least who oppose the war, including myself, think, well, maybe it was wrong to let My Lai stampede us out of Vietnam. Or at least it would have been a good thing if we could have won the war at a reasonable cost, which we probably couldn't have.
I don't think My Lai alone stampeded us out of the war by any. I mean, the standard example is actually the Tet Offensive.
Well, but they both had an effect.
You know what? Speaking of My Lai, one thing I've never understood, I just vaguely remember that, Lieutenant Calley, who was held responsible, got a pardon from Nixon, right? Which was wildly popular? Do you remember that?
You got me there.
Yeah,
I don't
Nixon
remember
pardoned
that.
him, and it was a big crowd pleaser for reasons that I still can't comprehend.
I don't remember.
I mean, it's hard to imagine the comparable thing happening in this context. But my line on this is actually remarkably like an argument I made in the Los Angeles Times op-ed shortly after Abu Ghraib, which is just that, first of all, in any protracted war, things like this are inevitably going to happen. But there's two distinctive things about contemporary wars compared to certainly World War II or even Vietnam. One is that we're in a political context now where the public opinion blowback from these things is more inimical to our national security than it used to be because of not just that because its hatred morphs into terrorism, but also because with all the democracies in the world, you more and more need to keep the people on your side, to keep the governments on your side, and alliances and so on. So that's one thing that's different. The other thing is that because we live in a technologically transparent society, these things are just more likely to come to light. Atrocities are more likely to come to light. It was digital cameras in Abu Ghraib. In this case, it was actually something you can't imagine happening either in World War II or in Vietnam. It was a local journalist, I think an Iraqi journalist, who had a camcorder. He filmed the aftermath of the thing, and it just seemed inconsistent with the report they'd gotten. He gave it, then an NGO got a hold of his videotape. They went back with their camcorder and interviewed some witnesses. This body of material came to the attention of Time magazine, and I think that's how it happened. But anyway, my argument was that this is just a cost of protracted wars that we should take into consideration before we decide to launch a war. That actually the downside of being in a war is bigger than it used to. So we should be more cautious than before. This was an argument I reiterate now.
You're turning into Senator Moynihan. Every argument you make is a reference to, as you said in an earlier...
To an argument I've already made?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I've boiled down my whole worldview to about 5 arguments, and I maintain that they are perennially valid.
It seems to me that this could, though, set up a good dynamic, which is the head of the new Iraqi government denounces us and expresses actually popular sentiment against occasional callous actions of the American military, and he gains some popularity, and also ordinary Iraqis feel that their views are being expressed by their government, and they have more allegiance to it. It might not be an entirely bad thing. It's certainly not a bad thing that it came to light.
Yeah. No, there's... so we can put you on the record as pro-atrocity, then?
No, but
just kidding.
The much more troubling article was Mir Rosen's.
Okay, but wait, but let me first agree with what you just said, which is that, I think one of our few hopes at this point is to foster a resurgent nationalism, a trans-sectarian nationalism in Iraq, and the best candidate for something for an Iraqi nationalism to kind of coalesce around is resentment of the United States, and
right.
We're in a position to encourage that by our actions.
Well,
I'm half joking, but only half.
I don't think it's crazy. I think that's the argument that our military has been making in Anbar province, which is if you guys get it together, then we'll leave. So the way to get rid of us is to stop killing each other.
Right, and if you don't do that, then we'll make you hate us so much that you'll unite. And
well, that's not going to happen, obviously, because the moment for that happening was Fallujah, when we were really worried that they were going to unite against us, and they still hated each other so much that they didn't. And there's been, there's various commentaries I've read on the blogs about how the Shiites sort of felt the Fallujahs were getting what they deserved. And when the Fallujahs dispersed to the rest of the country, they actually helped seed this ethnic violence.
Yeah. No, I don't mean unite militarily in an effective way against us or anything, but I do think that, what's his name, al-Maliki?
Yes.
The Prime Minister can use this as a way to gather support from both Sunnis and Shiites. Can use a certain kind of frostiness toward the United States, and can air, a certain amount of resentment of U.S. excesses, and that might be in our interest in the long run to the extent that it does unify Iraqis.
Right, that's why I thought it was odd that the Bush administration said that Maliki's words were misinterpreted.
Is that the way you pronounce his name, Maliki?
I don't know. I'm just making. No.
Which turned out to be, they kind of half retracted, or it turned out not to be true.
I don't know what the denouement of that was.
Liberal bloggers are claiming that they were wrong.
But anyway, it might not be a bad thing if the stronger interpretation was the accurate one. The other interesting thing I thought that happened was that Al Gore appeared on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and he did not endorse the left-wing pro-withdrawal Daily Kos Huffington Post line urged on him by people who see him as the alternative to Hillary. He, in fact, went out of his way to say withdrawal might be a bad thing, might leave a worse situation than before. And this echoed a sort of what I thought was an important article in these times, which reflected doubts on the left that now that it's become a civil war and they're killing each other, if we leave, it might leave. It's irresponsible to leave. It's immoral to leave. I thought it was very interesting that the guy who people who hate Hillary because of her Iraq stand are promoting to oppose her also isn't for withdrawal. Mm-hmm. And people like Ariana and Marcos Moulitsas must feel very betrayed by Gore at this point.
Is Ariana in favor of withdrawal?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm not yet. I mean, I'm kind of agnostic. I do think if our presence is helping more than hurting, it would not be morally right to withdraw because we created this mess. But I don't know that it is helping. Nir Rosen, whom you alluded to earlier, has argued that our presence is hurting.
Although his op-ed, which was horrifying, did not convince me that we were hurting. It just convinced me that we were ineffectual and we were being manipulated by various. What he describes is much worse than Haditha. It's not a few soldiers going berserk. It's Americans routinely being manipulated by sects to go and kill members of the other sect. So we go into a house and the Shiite people are urging us to kill the Sunnis inside, and we go into a Shiite mosque and kill a bunch of Sadr's militiamen and kill a bunch of innocent people, and that this is routine. This isn't exceptional. This is basically what we're doing there, and that would be much worse if true. He said some things that seemed suspicious to me. He said that in Iraq the police are Sadr's militia and the militia are Sadr's police, and the army is too. First, there's this competing Shiite group, the Badr Brigades. It seems to me that
he said the army is Sadr's.
I think he said that. I just read that. He said that the army was sort of was Shiites bent on revenge too, and the standard line is that the army is relatively good and it's the police that are bad.
I thought the army. Well, I don't know. I certainly thought it was more complicated than that, and that the Badr Brigade.
Yeah, it just
also had a big role.
Yeah, it led me to doubt his level of expertise.
I think he knows. I mean, he's a pretty smart guy who has spent a lot of time over there. So I don't know. I would go back and look at what he said.
Okay, well,
but certainly Skiri, which is not Sadr, has, I thought, a very prominent
well, that's
presence.
the point. That's the point.
And
so why
influence
did he...
over the Interior Ministry.
So
I thought it was basically in their hands.
Right. So why did he say it was solder if it's really scary? That's what I didn't understand.
I'd have to go back and see what he said.
Yeah, well, I urge readers to go and read his piece and make their own judgment.
Okay.
But that's the real horror story, not Haditha, I don't think. So, are we on to Iran?
From Iraq to Iran?
Yes.
There was this, since we last spoke, there's been this big deal where the United States said it would be willing to talk to Iran if Iran would first suspend its processing. And the bloggers were kind of divided on this. I mean, right out of the box, Kevin Drum was very skeptical and not very optimistic based on his argument that this seemed like an offer that was designed to be rejected because, after all, the object of the negotiations would be to get them to stop processing the stuff, and if that's a prerequisite for having negotiations, that then, from the Iranian point of view, is kind of asking a lot just to sit down and talk.
Well, but it's a pause. We're not asking that they permanently do it. We're asking that they stop it while they're talking to us. They can, if the talks break down, they can start.
Given how many times they have said publicly, this is our national right, it's asking a lot. It's asking for them to lose a little face. Daniel Dresner was more optimistic, also coming right out of the box, at least a little more optimistic. I personally think the Rosetta Stone here, if you're trying to decide whether the administration's offer was in fact disingenuous and designed to fail, I maintain that the Rosetta Stone is a David Brooks column from June 1st, which clearly was informed by extensive briefings from at least one administration official. I mean, it's clearly written from that vantage point.
Well, the State Department officials are clearly spinning the press like crazy, as if this was Condi's. It was like this is as important as the opening to China, and Condi Rice bestrides the world like a colossus.
Yeah.
Not ignoring the fact that the earlier failed policy was relying on the Europeans was also her idea. Yeah.
Yeah. No, she gets good spin in both this and the two TikToks in both the Washington Post and the New York Times. But what Brooks says is, first of all, what Wright did was set a chain of events that could lead to a UN resolution on Iranian sanctions as early as July. Diplomats, book your New York hotel rooms today. So first of all, I think the idea there is they will reject the possibility of discussions, and in the course of formulating this whole package, we got the Europeans and China and Russia to agree that if they rejected this, then we would lay out a package, including the threat of sanctions. So it seems to me the expectation is that this offer per se will fail. Then he's more explicit. He says of Bush administration officials, Bush and Rice, they did this with no expectations that Iran would agree to negotiate away its nuclear program. There are no optimists in this administration about the prospects for diplomacy. There are varying degrees of pessimism. Instead, Bush and Rice concluded that it was necessary to exhaust diplomatic alternatives in order to make international sanctions possible later. So, according to who he was talking to in the administration, there's no expectation that Iran will say yes. Now, the good news comes from the bottom of the Washington Post TikTok.
Wait, but are they pessimistic that the talks will succeed before sanctions are imposed, or are they pessimistic that sanctions will work?
I am pessimistic that sanctions will work. He does not. He seems to me, he may be optimistic about sanctions working. They may be optimistic. I think that's naive. I think, once you start down the sanctions path, you very rarely get a concession in the short run, and it's obviously kind of hard for them in terms of their national psychology to buckle once sanctions have actually been leveled. So I think that'll signify failure, and it'll be a long, hard road if sanctions are really triggered.
I noticed a Steve Clemens blog post where he says, he promises an outline in his next post about what sort of sanctions will work, and says it'll be very, very tough to do, but he seems to feel it's possible. So we eagerly await his next post.
Well, I'm guest blogging on Steve Clemens' blog tomorrow, Tuesday, so I'll handle that. Whatever you'd like him to say, he will say under my name. But let me
I interrupted a point of yours. So
well, just
feel
at the
free to
bottom of
finish
this
it.
TikTok, we actually get insight into which administration official briefed David Brooks. This is from the Washington Post piece. On Tuesday, Rice let UN, blah, 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 let Bolton in, John Bolton, UN investor John Bolton, long a skeptic about dealing with Iran, in on the secret. He wasn't in on the formulation of the policy according to this. Bolton was asked to call conservative commentators the next day to explain the decision. Well, the next day would be the day David Brooks was writing the column that seemed so well informed by administration officials, and I've got to think he would be a natural conservative commentator for Bolton to brief. So the hopeful scenario is that this is not, that Brooks' spin is not representative of Bush's and Condi's hopes so much as the Bolton-Cheney wing. But in any event, I actually think...
Well, not necessarily. Bolton could be following Condi's orders. He was obviously out of the loop.
He could be. I'm grasping for straws here, Mickey. But you're right. He could be. But I'm not optimistic about Iran saying yes to talks in any event. It does seem to me that it's asking...
But Brooks' column doesn't say that this is all a prelude to a military strike like it was in Iraq. Or are you saying that that's what it is?
No, but it seems clear... It seems, as I read him, that it's designed to get us to the point of the imposition of sanctions, and I maintain that at that point, nothing fruitful happens.
No, I don't disagree with that.
And if your goal is to keep nuclear weapons out of their hands at all costs, I maintain at that point, military action is likely down the road. I mean, remember, this administration has always had a naive faith in the ability of sticks per se, without carrots, to work. So this just pervades the administration, thinking we'll threaten them some more and they'll give in. But
so what's your solution? Is your solution the kill them with kindness approach of we force the carrots on them, and whether they like it or not, we're going to trade with them? Damn it! And that's not implausible. That might be a third way.
Well, first of all, I think what the European, what is actually being proposed to them, we have not heard what the package is that everybody, the Europeans and everybody agree on. I don't think we've heard, and it's apparently involves some carrots. The more carrots it involves, the easier it is for the Iranians to say yes, and the more attractive it is. There are definitely people in that power structure that want integration into the world. Actually, Eric Umansky, our own Eric, had a little blog item where he made the point that it might have been smarter to let the Iranians save face. He says, rather than ostentatiously announce we'll talk to Iran if they meet our demands, i.e. suspending uranium enrichment, wouldn't it have been better to send the exact same message, only very quietly? In other words, under the table, and then when they decide to suspend the processing, it looks like they didn't do it under arrest. It's easier under duress. It's easier for them to do for that reason, and then we say, oh, well, how nice of you now, we'll talk to you. That is, in any event, a good segue into what I want to talk about it at some point, and possibly soon, but if you have more to say about Iran...
Just one thing, a friend of mine said, why didn't we... this might have been another way to do it. Why didn't we respond to Ahmadinejad, I think that's how to pronounce it, his letter to Bush, and say, this is a good idea, we accept your invitation to talk, and that would have let them save face, because it would look like they initiated it, and not Condi Rice.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, why didn't we, they obviously wanted to engage in a war of ideas with Western liberal democracy. Well, a friend of mine, Dale Launer, suggested that take them up on it.
Yeah.
Are we going to lose that fight? Don't we win that with the vast majority of the world's people?
No, a number of people, and including a lot of moderates, said take that opportunity, reply to that letter, and I think that would have been a good idea. And I think, if you had an orator more like a Bill Clinton and less like a George Bush, it would have been more of a golden opportunity to get on global TV and talk about things.
Well, but Bush doesn't have to be our spokesman. I mean, we could have Condi Rice would be a perfectly fine spokesman.
Yep.
Anyway, so you at some point you wanted to get to.
Okay, this is on the subject more generically of making threats against nations and chastising them publicly as opposed to privately. This is actually a follow-up on a dialogue we had where I was saying it was a case where we shouldn't have publicly chastised. I think it was Russia because it would make it harder for them to do something without losing face.
But it obviously didn't. We chastised Russia, and they're now on board. So your theory was completely disproved. You said
we've actually sweetened the deal considerably since then. I mean,
you said Cheney shouldn't have said those nasty things about Russia because it would stop them from cooperating. He said those nasty things. They were annoyed, but they still cooperated.
Well, but that on the day we were talking, I said I predict that these talks will fail. Nothing did come out of those talks per se. Since then, what the administration is publicly offering has gone way in the directions of what the Russians and the Europeans were asking. For example, that we will sit down and talk to Iran under at least some circumstances. Now, in reading the TikToks, it's actually not clear to me whether that was on the table, how much of this, if any, was on the table on that day that we were talking. But anyway, if Russia has signed on to something, it seems to be the case that it's a considerably sweeter deal, considerably more in the way of what they wanted, than had been on the table when we had that discussion. That is my view.
But what's your point about negotiating? It seems to me that Cheney's nasty speech could have been functional, and that it let the American right wing vent, and it let us make our points, and then we could concede the Russian substantive points, and then everybody's happy.
Let the right wing vent. I mean, on that particular point, it just didn't make that big a splash. I don't think it was psychologically important for the United States or anything. But the point I want to make is more generic. I mean, first of all, actually, I want to complain. I went back and looked at that tape where we had this discussion about, whether, you have this view that you should always, well, not always, you have this view that you should, that often the best thing to do is just confront people with your views publicly, and then you should hash it out and be honest, blah, blah, blah. And here's what you said. Your attitude, referring to me, is you should never speak the truth. You should always do it under the table. I replied, you said I said that. I didn't say that. And you replied, you said you should always make the threats under the table. We'll roll the videotape and see what you just said. Well, Mickey, I rolled the videotape, and we can let our viewers decide. I'll link to it. But I think what I was saying was clearly in the context of that specific discussion. And you will stand corrected after you look at it. That's my interpretation. But mainly, I want to say that this caused me to ask myself, under what circumstances do I think public threats? I mean, is he right? Do I think public threats are never good diplomacy? And no. There's actually two things that make public threats good diplomacy, okay? First of all, if publicizing the threat is necessary to make it credible, then that can be a case for doing it. An example would be, for example, I was saying, I think in our last dialogue, I would be happy with the public declaration that if terrorists ever use a nuke on us that has a clear chemical signature that it came from Iran, we would devastate Tehran and or kill the political leadership in Iran or whatever, because it's their responsibility to keep this stuff out of the hands of terrorists. That's the kind of threat where you're threatening retaliation so strong, and it will come at some cost to yourself, that you actually, it becomes more credible that you've made it in front of everyone. And the same would be true of, say, something with China, where you said, if you invade Taiwan, we will cut off all imports from China. That's something that's going to be so costly to the United States that it's more credible if you say it in public, okay? So that's one criterion.
What's so costly? The making of the threat is so costly?
No, delivering on the threat would be so costly that they're not going to believe you unless you raise the costs of not delivering by making it public, because then you will lose face if you don't deliver. This is actually, I think this is kind of a well-known thing in game theory circles. But there's another big one, which is, it's a question of what are you demanding? If you're saying you have to do this tomorrow or we'll do this, then you're demanding that they lose face. Okay, like well, in fact, a good example came up in the context of Hamas, and we argued about this. I said, the administration's policy is, if you don't recognize Israel tomorrow, we're going to cut off all funding to the Palestinian administration. Now, first of all, by the way, that has not worked out well. That is what they did. That's what you defended. That's the policy you defended. So far as we can tell, things are worse in Israel. worse in the occupied territories. Hamas has actually been strengthened by that policy. We are looking worse than ever. Bush has even apparently used our power over the banking system to keep Arab nations from delivering money directly into the bank accounts of Palestinian workers, which would completely bypass Hamas. But now we're being blamed for that, at least as of a week ago we were, at least unless things have changed. But anyway, I want to say generically, that's a case where you're saying, do this tomorrow or we'll punish you. It's hard for them to do that. Whereas if you're saying, keep not doing something you're not doing, like China's not invading Taiwan, nobody thinks they have plans to invade Taiwan tomorrow. So when you make something contingent on their continuing to follow that policy, they don't have to lose face, because nobody was expecting them to invade tomorrow or next week or next month. They just kind of go on and keep not invading. And it's the same way with Iran. If you're saying, do not give nukes to terrorists who might use it on us, or we'll do X, Y, and Z, well, that's fine, because they don't, you're not demanding that they lose face tomorrow. You're just saying follow the policy you're still following, and nobody was expecting you to change it tomorrow. So those are the two generic conditions. When making a threat publicly will enhance the credibility of the threat, and or when what you're demanding is not conspicuous capitulation, conspicuous change of policy, but the continued adherence to whatever their old policy was. So you have clarified my thinking, and I thank you.
You're welcome. That all makes sense. What bothered me is you seem to, anytime something might upset somebody, not make them lose face, but just sort of annoy them, or be either annoy a state like criticizing Russia for backsliding on democracy, or annoy sensibilities of billions of Muslims around the world. You seem to say we should sort of, you never sort of accept that sometimes it's in our interest to do that. The Cheney speech wasn't causing the Russians to lose face. It was just very critical of Russia, and it pissed them off.
No, what I said
it wasn't that bad.
What I said
in the end, it did not stop Putin from agreeing to go along with some sort of sanctions.
No, what I said was, if he had capitulated to our long-standing demands to impose these sanctions, in other words, changed his position, then Cheney, having said that, would have cost him domestic political points. It made it harder to get him to comply. Now, that's not what he finally did. He didn't change his position. We changed our position by saying, now we're willing to talk, in a way that made it seem like he was not changing his position. Okay, we had to sweeten the deal, so it was not a case of him altering his policy, which is what everyone thought we were trying to talk them into doing at that point.
Well, I think he did alter his policy a bit. He signed on to some sanctions.
No, because they had been saying all along, look, you guys have got to talk to Iran. China and Russia and the Europeans, as I understand it, said, you've got to talk. We have been saying, no, we don't want to talk to Iran. We want sanctions. Now we've said, okay, there are circumstances under which we'll talk to Iran. And they have said, okay, then there are circumstances under which there could be sanctions.
Well, so there was give on both sides.
There was give on both sides. But my point is, that doesn't technically qualify as a humiliating policy change on his point, because we sweetened the deal.
I didn't say it was a humiliating policy change. I just say that the Cheney speech didn't queer the deal, and you implied that it would queer the deal.
It queered the deal that everyone thought was being negotiated at the time. That deal didn't happen. We didn't get them to sign on to sanctions without us giving something in advance.
But I think if you read the TikTok, they'd already concluded that deal was dead by the time Cheney gave his speech.
That could be the case. I didn't realize it, and that's not what I was talking about. I didn't realize we were sweetening the deal if we were doing it. But in any event, I would differ with your claim that what I'm always saying is, oh, this will annoy them. The way I think I always put it is, I say, you look at the dynamics of political pressure, this is going to make it harder for their leaders to comply with our wishes. Hamas is a perfect example. It could conceivably work out down the road, but the administration followed the policy you said to follow. I said don't do this for very much the reasons I've just outlined. So far, seems to be a disaster. And, the hospitals running short of things, America being blamed for it, Palestinians not getting paid, America being blamed for it. Meanwhile, the whole, the possibility of civil war, I think that won't happen, but continued, strife among the Palestinian side which makes it much less likely that there will ever be any kind of negotiated settlement between the Palestinians and Israel. And if there's not a negotiated settlement, there will not be a lasting settlement.
Well, I could well have been wrong. I thought but Bob, if you're spending your time going over previous tapes of what you said on Bloggingheads TV and figuring out whether you were right or wrong, I urge you to A, get a life, and B, finish your book.
Okay, I'll do that. But I urge you to go back to that point in the videotape where you said, we'll roll the videotape and see what you just said and find out whether you were right or wrong. Will you do that?
If you insist, I'll do that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. I think we had one more segment, which was...
No, I think we had... Oh, well...
You were going to take Prozac and read your email.
I think we had two email-related things. One was just reading email. Yeah, I have this line on email, but it's ill-formed, but it has to do with this connection between email and Prozac.
I didn't know there was one, so...
No, I didn't either until like yesterday. I realized that this is the way I wanted to package the thing. I mean, it starts with this idea that email increasingly leads, in my life, to like unresolved communication. You send emails to people and you kind of think you will get one back, or you think you'll get it back soon, and it kind of doesn't happen.
And you don't, and you're annoyed.
Yeah, and you don't know why it happened, which I guess is in a way good. It could be that the person had good intentions, but it slipped down their inbox. It could be that, it got spam filtered. Could be that they just, saw the email and said, screw this guy.
Right, and that ambiguity is saving, because it means that if they don't respond, it could be a good thing, so you shouldn't get annoyed.
Well, if you can convince yourself that you should follow the most benign interpretation and always assume that, it was the spam filter. Sure, if you're that detached from reality, then it's fine.
It could be just that your email required thought, and so they deferred it, and then it never happened.
It could be,
That's
but
what usually
this is where you give the Prozac. I mean, which interpretation you follow depends on your serotonin level, okay? If you've got, like, high self-esteem, you're gonna do the interpretation that's charitable to you. Oh, it either got spam filtered or blah blah blah. If you're low serotonin, it's going to be very discomforting, and you're going to be going, oh, another person who doesn't like me.
Right, that's right, but we need a new rather than Prozac. Don't we just need a new etiquette that says it's okay not to respond to emails. Unlike, not responding to phone calls in the era when not that many people have your number. Now anybody in the world can email you, and nobody can possibly keep up with all their emails.
Well, that's true, but there are never going to be circumstances under which a person with kind of normal, unaltered serotonin levels doesn't get offended by somebody's failure to respond, right? I mean, it's one thing if you email George Bush, but there's some people, right, that you would just think, even given the volume of email, I would certainly expect this person to reply. And it seems to be increasingly people are having the experience where people they really thought would reply are not replying. So I maintain, and again, it all depends whether you can handle this psychologically in a graceful way. Depends partly on your serotonin level. So you either got to have naturally high self-esteem or take Prozac. Now,
I claim that I've had enough experiences where people did not mean ill by not replying, and I have enough experiences with my own life where I don't mean ill by not replying. I may mean that I care so much about this person that I really want to think about it before I reply. That I claim I don't need Prozac.
Well, you have naturally high self-esteem, and with good reason. You're a renowned blogger and pioneer of political discourse and so on.
I deny that I have naturally high self-esteem.
We certainly have thick skin. Let me put it that way.
Okay, I believe yes.
They're related, I think. But for those of us who are afflicted with chronic self-doubt, not without reason, I can see. Don't even utter that sentence. It's a problem. Now, I have not yet resorted to Prozac, but it's a problem. The other thing I want to say about Prozac and email is I think taking Prozac makes people more effective users of the medium of email, because the people who use email effectively are the people who are like bombing the world with emails, right? And they can manage to buffer their egos from the fact that a certain percentage of them will not pay off, and they will not hear. And they can also without compunction, do these mass emails about, they've got a book coming out and they do 4 different mass emails and stuff, These are, and of course it's true that a small percentage of the people who get them are highly annoyed, but on balance I think it probably helps them. It gets them, media appearances they wouldn't have gotten. That's like the opposite of me. Like, I have not sent one mass email out about Bloggingheads TV. Most people, they start a website, they would do that, right?
Right. No, I've been working on one and I haven't gotten it together either. But it seems to me your point is more important in terms of the difference between email and speaking, or even email and a well-written letter, is that the nuances don't come through. You read it very quickly, and if you read it in a low serotonin mood, you're going to give it a negative, dark reading. And if you read it in a high serotonin mood, you're going to give it the positive reading. And sometimes they're both completely plausible. And you'll probably do better if you avoid the negative reading and give all your emails the positive reading.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say nuances don't come through. I mean, I think you just described them coming through. I mean, to many people.
You don't get inflection. Sometimes if you praise people, it comes off as condescending. So if that person's in a low serotonin mood, they're going to be offended when all you really did, you intended to be nice.
Well, yeah. I mean, no, it's true.
It's a problem with email.
In the days of written correspondence, a letter you wrote would have, like, the obligatory levity, a little joke or something, the obligatory, humility, if you're asking for, and it would be this kind of well-crafted request for something. And if you look at the letters in the age of correspondence, like Darwin's letters, they're masterpieces. And my instinct is to write like well-crafted, nice emails. But then, every once in a while you get an email from somebody who's clearly like successful, and it's just this like one-line kind of crude request that you do something or something, and you go, oh, maybe that's the way I should do it. And of course, so then I send out some one-line crude request and don't hear from the person, and think, well, maybe it doesn't work for me. But it's an extremely different discourse, and
I just think the mere act of writing a letter was sort of such an investment that it was not offensive in a way that an email can be offensive.
Well, that's true.
I'm tossing off this little condescending thing to you.
Well, and also you can get mass letters from people you knew.
Yeah.
But I mean, actually, the more standard mode of communication before email was actually phone messages.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that was a very different world, because when you would leave a message for somebody, you could be pretty sure they got it, and if they didn't call back, you took that as really signifying that they didn't want to talk to you, right? Isn't that the way you took it back in the age of phone messages?
Yes, I guess.
And now it's all much more ambiguous.
Well,
and you're saying that can be good.
I'm saying that can be good, yes. We're all wrestling with this. I do that. I have that problem on both ends. But I claim to have that if you follow the rule that absence of a reply is not a diss, that it'll get you through the day.
Well, yeah, if you can delude yourself in general. That's why I'm talking about Prozac. Prozac is a drug that deludes people. Psychologists have shown that pessimists actually read the world more accurately than optimists. I mean, Prozac. And I'm not against it. I'm not one of these anti-Prozac crusaders.
This is just a subset of the general point that irrational optimists do better than realistic pessimists.
Yeah, I mean, and optimism isn't quite it. It's people with a perhaps irrationally high self-regard or an irrationally strong buffer against negative feedback, or an obliviousness to negative feedback.
Well, nobody can accuse you
to interpret.
Nobody can accuse you of being oblivious to negative feedback.
So you don't buy my theory at all?
No, I do buy your theory.
Oh,
but it seems to me that it's possible through use of natural methods, like telling yourself that this is not a diss, to achieve the same results that you would achieve by taking mind-altering drugs.
Yeah.
But I urge you to be ready for tomorrow. Ann Coulter's book comes out with an attack on Darwin, which I know you'll be eager to respond to.
Thanks for sharing that thought, Mickey. I know she's a noted evolutionary biologist and Darwin scholar. And she always takes pains to become intimately familiar with all the subjects she opines about. So
she's read some books. I'd just be interested in what your response is.
You already told me that she relies on this guy Philip Johnson, and I have.
And a bunch of
I
other
told
people.
you he's completely confused, and I've written about it. I wrote a piece for the New Yorker a few years ago that's I think still on my website, Nonzero.org, that spends a couple of paragraphs on the confusion of the guy she's relying on. I don't think I'll spend my time on Ann Coulter's book. Thanks.
I'm completely convincible that she's full of it, but I went back and read your piece, and that piece did not do it. So you're going to...
But there is a Philip Johnson reference, right?
There is a Philip Johnson reference, and you point out one fallacy he commits. It's not...
Oh, but that was Philip Johnson's whole opening argument. I mean, that is the Philip Johnson argument, Mickey. Trust me. It may have evolved since then, but in his first book, Darwin on Trial, this was the heart of the logic.
Okay,
and it was just completely out of touch with what Darwinian theory actually is.
We're not going to be able to get into the substance. It's just a teaser.
No, but if people click on that link and go to my New Yorker piece, I want them to know that was Philip Johnson's, the heart of his original argument. And this is the person Ann Coulter's relying on.
She relies on other... I don't think she claims to have done original research, but it would be, she puts a bunch of arguments together, and knowing nothing about Darwinism, I can't refute them, and I'm relying on people like you.
I'm saying that buying Philip Johnson as a credible source is proof that she knows nothing about Darwinism.
Okay. Well, we'll see what happens.
We will. One thing I can predict won't happen is that I read her book.
Fair enough.
Now, let's segue beautifully from email and Prozac to just email. Read a little viewer email.
Okay.
Kyle D. wrote in, when you were skeptical of our retaliating about, of the threat that we would retaliate for nukes traced to Iran but not delivered by Iran, he writes, since we ousted the leadership of Iraq for the diplomatic equivalent of looking at us cross-eyed, I doubt we'd let the mullahs reign supreme after we find their bomb parts in our backyard. I only bring that up is because I made a similar argument to you, and you kind of bought it, and I now realize I think I had read this email before I made that argument, so I may have been kind of plagiarizing Kyle D. unconsciously.
I'm sort of still not buying it on second thought.
Oh, you sounded very compliant last time.
I was. That was probably my false deference.
There was your disingenuous concession.
Yeah.
Trademark Mickey disingenuous concession.
Because it's hard to overthrow the mullahs. Bad is easy. They incinerate New York. We press a button and incinerate Moscow. If we're going to overthrow the mullahs without incinerating Tehran, that's more difficult. You have to send in troops, and you have to...
No, you could incinerate Tehran. I'm saying there would be a public clamoring for it. Wouldn't be hard. But speaking of disingenuous concessions, we have an email from someone who doesn't provide his or her name. But her suggestion, or his suggestion, for a new T-shirt slogan is, I defer to your expertise. That would be good. Now here's somebody that writes about me, a duller, less humorous version of Niles Crane, if that's possible. Does he have an upper row of teeth? Never seen them, because he never smiles. Good point. Could be the reason I don't smile, You never know. But Mickey, Niles Crane's apparently a character on Frasier?
Yes.
I never saw that. Should I take it that this is not a compliment? Not knowing Niles Crane, is that a wild extrapolation from this email that this guy is not?
No. People told me I look like Elliot Gould in Little Murders, and I thought that was a compliment for years, and then it turns out it's not a compliment.
He wasn't a bad-looking guy.
Yeah, but apparently in Little Murders he runs around like a comatose man, and bad things happen to him.
Well, he still looked good.
And still does. I saw him the other day.
Speaking of your appearance, Pat R. writes, do you remember your invisible cloak gag, Mickey?
Yes.
She writes that this gag would, quote, work a lot better if we didn't see your balding head as you try to scrunch down under your desk. And when it pops into the frame about 15 seconds later, check the videotape. She challenges you. A challenge you've been known to issue.
Bob,
Mickey, I have a question.
They hate us for our technology.
I have a question. Leaving aside how you pulled it off, what was that thing about?
What was what thing about?
The disappearing thing, where you did this disappearing thing. We'll link to it, but what was that about? What was that a reference to?
That was a reference to the development of cloaking technology, and I put up a link in the afterthought section to the London Times article describing this breakthrough in molecular research where we will soon be able to have cloaking technology.
Oh, okay.
It was ripped from the day's headlines.
There was, but its connection to the day's headlines was better concealed than you were during the bid, apparently.
I thought I referred to that. But,
obscurely, if at all, I believe.
It could have been a cheap reference to Harry Potter, but it wasn't. It was a reference to the real world.
Alexander D. writes, this is a reference to your tendency to throw out these fancy French words in a kind of show-offy way, but then endearingly concede that you don't know how to pronounce them. He just writes, idée fixe is pronounced idée fixe.
Well, isn't that what I said?
I don't know.
No, I said feast. Oh, well.
I think you endearingly professed ignorance as to how to pronounce it, maybe. But can you remind me, what does it actually mean?
Yeah, it means you have an idea that you're not budging from, that you cling to like a pit bull.
Ah.
You knew that, Bob.
That would be, so I have some of those, don't I?
You're feigning ignorance.
No, I really didn't. I don't do fancy French words. I'm from the heartland.
It means fixed idea.
Well, that I could tell, but in some sense. But that could mean a lot of things. And what you just said is you're clinging to it like a bulldog?
A bad animal analogy. The point is that Bush has these ideas like Social Security reform and immigration reform and going to war with Iraq that he clings to sort of too long in the face of contrary evidence.
Right.
That it's actually more obvious with immigration reform and Social Security reform than in Iraq. Iraq might work out. Immigration reform will not work out.
Well, is there the connotation that you cling to it in the face of contrary evidence, or just doggedly?
I think it's both, yes.
Because I'm trying to decide whether it applies to my fixations.
I think it's vaguely pathological. I think it's not supposed to be a positive thing.
Could apply.
Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah.
Tyler R. writes about the dialogue with you and Jackie Shire. You could almost see the cartoon above her head. Quote, this is on immigration. You could almost see the caption above her head. Quote, but I love my Mexican nanny. For the record, she does not have a nanny. She is a stay-at-home mom who somehow manages to work Bloggingheads TV appearances among other professional activities into her life.
I'm glad you cleared her name. Not that anybody would have known the slur until you read it. But.
Not anybody would have what? Oh, you're right. No, you got to create the controversies before you quell them if you want to get those high ratings.
Well, now that whole process is very exciting.
Thank you.
Well, great.
Another productive
yeah,
dialogue.
so I'll go look at that videotape and maybe we could spend a whole hour next time talking about whether
No,
whether
that's
you
not
right or
fair,
not.
because this was, you belittled my revisiting that. And the reason I revisited it was not because of your claiming, your dispute about what I said. It was because right after the dialogue, I thought, now wait a second, under what circumstances do public threats make sense?
Okay.
So I've now articulated these two principles. I thought that was actually one of the better examples of the Hegelian dialectic at work and us moving Western thought forward. You belittle it at the end in a dismissive and almost cruel way.
I belittle what?
What you characterized as my bizarre fixation on what we had said in the past.
Oh, you mean I belittled it just now?
No, you belittled it at the end of the segment, and I snapped back at you that you should go look at the videotape that you claimed vindicated you and see how woefully mistaken you were. But enough about that. I'm saying that you belittled what was really a totally laudable effort to clarify ideas on my part.
No, I think it was laudable, yes, but belittling and fake deference, those are the two weapons in my quiver.
Well, in any event, I'm going to publicly issue this threat, Mickey. I'm not going to try to clarify any more ideas.
No, I thought that was useful. It's a good thing.
Until you say that it's useful, which you've just done. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
I will go pursue my natural alternatives to Prozac now.
You've got them. I don't, man. You should count yourself lucky.
Which is probably a bagel. Okay.
All right.
See ya.
See you around.